John, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
I think probably the top issue in the 19th District is the economy, but because of what's happened in Orlando, let's start with foreign policy and start with terror. You know, it's so senseless. How do you stop this? You know, what's the plan to win the war on terror?
Well, I think number one, we have to be honest with ourselves. This is radical Islamic terrorism. They are often homegrown, as this person apparently was. They're influenced by social media. They're influenced by what they perceive to be the success of ISIS and global jihad. And I think, candidly, Americans need to be prepared for the fact this is going to be a long struggle. We have to work very aggressively to root out the people who are here, who are the lone wolf attacker, like this fellow, for instance, and try to root them out using intelligence and surveillance means. And I know that many people have objected to the metadata program, but the fact is that we need to use all the tools that are available to us from an intelligence and a law enforcement basis. We also have to recognize, again, as Americans, that we are facing what is going to be a very long and sustained fight with radical Islamic terrorism. And what has really happened in the last few years is that they now have, like they did before the World Trade Center attacks in 2001, they now have basically a state of their own. And before 2001, they had basically taken over the Afghan state. We were able to, with our allies in Afghanistan, throw them out, and with NATO. But the fact is that Afghanistan is still a terrorist hotbed. And we've got to recognize that ISIS, now with the accoutrements, if you will, of a nation, of a state, we've got to defeat them. And there's no two ways about it. We have to work with allies in the region. It can't just be America, obviously. It really needs to be the more moderate Islamic states in the region who take the lead on this. We have to aid them militarily and with intelligence.
Now, this person was already an American on American soil, but what do you think about closing the borders? You know, Donald Trump has called for stopping the flow of Muslims into this country. Do you agree with that? Do we need to ban certain people from entering the country?
I don't think that's the right approach. In part because it's not really going to win us favor with the very more moderate Islamic countries and forces that we need to have on our side. So we need to look at it that we cannot just view everyone who might be a Muslim, someone who is practicing in the Islamic faith. We cannot view them all as an enemy, but we have to also be very sober about how we approach this. And we've got to use means, intelligence in particular, and surveillance with the FBI here at home, with our security agencies and the CIA abroad. We've got to use intelligence like they do in New York City as well to really monitor and to surveil those who are suspected of trying to do us harm.
And what about a ban on Syrian refugees? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I have felt all along that it made no sense to bring massive numbers of people from the Middle East into the United States. Much better to work, again, with moderate Muslim countries in the region, the Jordanians, the Turks, etc., to leave people closer to home, help them resettle temporarily until we can help restore some semblance of peace and security in that region. But it doesn't make any sense to just import a whole host of people in the United States. I think there are specific humanitarian exceptions to all of these rules, but I think on a broad basis it doesn't make sense to be bringing large numbers of people from that region into the U.S.
Okay. This shooter used an assault rifle. It's renewed some calls today about gun control. Where do you stand on that? Is gun control an answer to this violence?
You know,
and not just terrorism, but shooting violence.
It's an automatic response of many. But I would recall that in the 90s, under the Clinton administration, they had an assault weapons ban for about 10 years. And every study that was done of that ban showed it was ineffective. What we've got to do is deal with mental health. You've got to also deal with the surveillance of people who are, through social media and other ways, who are going to present a terrorist threat to us. You know, the semi-automatic rifle like the AR-15 is it's one of the most popularly owned firearms in the United States. To simply come up and say, oh, we can ban this and this is going to be an effective response, that's more of a political response than a real response.
Is it frustrating to see how already this whole shooting has been politicized from both sides?
It is frustrating to see that, because I do think, again, we've got to really speak soberly to the American people about the fact that this is going to be, it may be a multi-generational fight that we are going to have with radical Islamic terrorism. This is not something that's going to go away. It's not one magic wand, one passing a law, one administration changing, another one coming in. That's not going to solve it. What's going to solve it is the realization that we're in a long and sustained struggle and fight with radical Islamic terrorism. We need to win allies abroad with the Muslim countries, but we also need to have the American people understand that this is going to be a long, could be multi-generational fight.
All right, back here at home, the economy in the 19th. It's probably the #1 issue, the pocketbook issue. People want a better life for themselves and for their children. What do you do if you go to Congress to help give people that, to help improve the economy?
Well, one, I mean, people are upset about the economy, and there's good reason. Real wages, real incomes have been flat or declining for the last 10, 15 years. The other thing, in this 19th Congressional District, which is a wide span from the Capital District all the way down to the Pennsylvania border, all the way out to Cooperstown, all the way to southern Dutchess County, it is a very big part of upstate New York. Upstate New York has lost 1 million people in the last 10 years. They have migrated to other states, migrated downstate, but they have left upstate New York, and primarily the reason because they're leaving because of taxes, and they're leaving because of lack of jobs. And I've offered specific plans, for instance, to finally eliminate the federal law which allows New York State, allows Albany to impose a large portion of Medicaid costs on county property taxpayers. 42% on average of the county property tax in this district goes to pay Medicaid. Virtually no other state does this. Kathy Jimino in Rensselaer County will tell you about half, 54% in fact, of the county property tax levy goes to pay for Medicaid. This is really unheard of in other states. So when people say, oh, I can go to South Carolina and I can pay $1,000 a year with a better house than I have here in the Capital Region or here in the Catskills, there's reason for that. It's true. And so what we've got to do is we've got to address the things that are driving people away. Lack of jobs and high property taxes. And New York has got a terrible reputation. We rank 50th in business climate in the country. So Albany has to do things, and Washington needs to do things. Tax reform, regulatory reform, and that will bring about, I think, smart policy changes can bring about more private sector economic growth.
As a congressman, can you use the bully pulpit to make changes in Albany as well, you saying?
Well, I mean, the law that I'm talking about, the federal Medicaid statute, authorizes, specifically says a state may impose some of the Medicaid costs on the local governments. But New York does it far beyond what any other state did. I call it Nelson Rockefeller's 50-year-old mistake. We can fix this by forcing Albany to take accountability for its own Medicaid system and stop putting it on the backs of the property tax.
But you want to target other taxes and fees in New York as well.
I think that Obamacare, for instance, has many aspects to it which have discouraged employment. Many employers have told me they won't have more than 50 employees in their business because of the added responsibilities they have as an employer once you go past 50 employees. Why do people think all of a sudden we have so many part-timers working? Because companies are now being encouraged, in essence, by the Obamacare statute to hire part-time. Community bankers, where do 70% of our jobs come from? From small business. Where does small business get the capital to invest? Through local community banks. Every single community banker I've talked to in this congressional district, all throughout the Capital Region, the Catskills, the Mid-Hudson, every one of them says Dodd-Frank is a regulatory mess on them. And as one banker said to me, he said, we spend thousands of dollars to prepare reports that no one reads. So what's happening, whether it's the Dodd-Frank rules, which hurt small business lending, whether it's Obamacare, which hurts employment, whether it's a whole host of other regulatory dictates where the Obama administration or the Cuomo administration, they're making the cost of employment higher. So if you want more jobs, you can't tell employers that the cost of hiring a new person is now higher when you're struggling to begin with. So that's what I think we've got to bring more common sense back to. How can private sector employers, how can small businesses actually hire and create jobs?
And along those lines, in New York, we have now voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour eventually. Where do you stand on a federal minimum wage hike?
I think now New York has done this. It would just compound the error. Look, if you're a dairy farmer in this district, every gallon of milk you're producing, you're losing money on. And yet Cuomo and the legislature just said, now you've got to pay a higher minimum wage. It doesn't make any sense. The small business economy in upstate New York, in the capital region, the Catskills, central New York, is really hurting. And people are being driven away. We're not going to create more jobs by making employment more expensive. And I think that's really the key. Look, everyone wants employees to make more money. I do, you do, we all would like to make more money, okay? But the bottom line is, if it doesn't make economic sense for that employer to hire a new person, or if his or her costs are going up precipitously, they're going to have to fire people. Or like in the fast food industry, they're going to automate those jobs out of existence. That doesn't make any sense if you're a 16 or 17-year-old kid and you're looking to get a job. You're going to be displaced by higher costs that government is imposing on that potential employer, and those employers are going to use automation to replace you. Then they don't need you.
You brought up Obamacare. I wanted to ask you about health care, but we'll start with that. Is that a day one thing for you? You know, if you get to Washington, is that one of the first things that you would work on repealing? Tell me where you stand on Obamacare.
Well,
exactly.
I think Obamacare is a big overreach. I think they wanted to deal with the 15% of the public that didn't have insurance. And I think there are some approaches and ways that we could address that. But instead, they didn't just deal with the 15% that didn't have insurance. They changed the insurance regulatory system and the insurance healthcare system for the 85% that had it. And so everywhere I go around this district, I have tales from individuals, from families, and from employers telling me that they're now, the big laugh about the Obamacare is that it's called the Affordable Care Act. Well, prices are skyrocketing, premiums are skyrocketing, and part of this is because of the mandates that are contained within the statute. It's too broad, it's too all-encompassing, and we need to fix it. And frankly, depending on who is elected president, if Hillary Clinton is elected president, it's not going to be repealed. If Donald Trump is elected president, it might be repealed. So, I mean, I think it really depends upon who's sitting in the Oval Office and who controls the Congress and the Senate after this election. That will really tell us what's practical and what's possible to fix.
What do you do for that 15% you talked about? You don't want to leave those people behind.
No, and I think what we have to do is we should expand community health centers. We should create more opportunities for low-cost insurance, and some of the subsidy ideas that are contained for low-income people to purchase insurance are good. Those are logical ideas, but we've got to address you can't fix it for the 15% when you wreck the market for the 85%, and that's really what's happened. The premise of Obamacare was that you would have all of these younger, healthier people joining, and they would therefore subsidize the care for the sicker people or the people that didn't have insurance. Well, it's turned out a lot of the younger, healthier people are not joining. They're paying the fine, but they're not getting in the insurance risk pool. And if you don't have that larger pool of people in the insurance pool, you're not going to be able to contain costs for the people that are getting insurance. So this is the issue. The other problem, I think, Greg, is that people have not recognized. Obamacare has really accelerated the trend towards eliminating the local practices of medicine. Mm-hmm. And many physicians now and many physicians' assistants can only work in a hospital-based setting because they can't afford to deal with the regulatory mess that would be imposed on them. So it's really changed the practice of medicine, and not all for the good. Many physicians that I talk to tell me that they spend more time doing the paperwork, sitting in their office with the patient, spending most of the time plugging stuff into their laptop rather than talking to the patient. And so it's really changed the practice of medicine for the worse. The other piece here is that we should recognize you can't add all of these extra people to insurance unless you also increase the number of people who are physicians, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, because then you have more people searching for accelerated healthcare, more healthcare, without increasing similarly the supply of physicians and physician's assistants and nurse practitioners. So we have a real urgency in this country and in this state, especially in rural areas and some urban areas, to increase the supply of medical practitioners. And that's something I think the state and the federal government need to work on.
Another healthcare issue is the rising cost of prescription drugs. A lot of people cite that as one of their top concerns. How do you bring those costs down?
Well, I think Dr. John Bennett, the head of CEO of CDPHP here in the Capital Region, that is one of the messages he constantly has about the cost of prescription drugs and the acceleration of insurance premiums because of the cost of prescriptions. I think what we have to do is we have to encourage more generics. We have to look at potentially importation from Canada, for instance. But we also have to be careful about the safety of the drugs themselves. So I think that it's inevitable that we have had tremendous benefit because of the pharmaceutical industry. It's a great industry, and the medical improvements and the care for people today because of the advances in pharmaceuticals has been significant. But what's happened as well, it costs so much for a pharmaceutical company to bring a product to market. And many times they could invest tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars and get nothing at the end. So the FDA process has to be, I think, reformed to make it easier to bring new drugs, life-saving treatments onto the market and to modernize existing drugs, while at the same time taking a look to make sure we get more generics into the market, because that's what brings the cost competitiveness and pressure down on the cost.
Okay, but safe generics, you're saying? Safe
generics, obviously.
Okay. Let's talk politics for a second. You're, the person whose seat you're running for has term limited himself. That's why the seat's open. Would you term limit yourself, and how do you feel about term limits in general? Do you think there should be term limits, legal term limits across the board?
Greg, when I ran for governor back in 2006, I proposed term limits for New York State. The governor, the statewide elected officials, and the legislative leaders in the Capitol. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I would like to serve 4 or 5 terms because I do think that part of the process we have to recognize, you do have a seniority system in Congress. And your ability to actually accomplish more and rise up the ranks in committees in that seniority system is very apparent. And if you are leaving too soon, you're not able to rise up and do as much as you can for your district. So yes, I support term limits, but I think that where that number is, I would like 4 or 5 terms if I'm successful, if the people trust me enough. But remember, term limits, you got to run every 2 years in these jobs, and
the voters can term limit you.
The voters have the ultimate say in this process.
It's tough to beat an incumbent, though. Let's face it. Once you're in, you've got to really do something pretty wrong to get voted out.
Well, I think
it's usually 90% or above of incumbent re-election.
Well, it's like a new TV station coming on the market. How could they possibly compete with a guy like Greg Floyd? Because you have much better name ID. But the reality is, this congressional district is a very competitive seat. It can be won. It's a swing district. It can be won by Democrats or Republicans, I think, in any kind of cycle. So I think for someone to say that this particular seat would be a quote-unquote safe seat for either party, that wouldn't be the case.
I think you're right about that. The presumptive nominee of your party for president, Donald Trump, has certainly been a different candidate, if you will. Yes. Will you support him as the presumptive nominee?
I've said all along I will support the Republican nominee, and I will support Mr. Trump if he's the Republican nominee, and he certainly appears to be.
Do you share any of the reservations that have been brought up by some people about his temperament or his fitness to be president?
I do share some of those concerns, and I balance it out with the fact that I know what Hillary Clinton would do, and I think on most policy preferences, I would not share her policy preferences. I think the Supreme Court, for instance, is vitally important. And I think that Hillary Clinton's policy preferences she's been driven very far to the left by the Bernie Sanders challenge, and her policies I don't think would be good for the country or good for New York State.
Do you think Donald Trump would make a good president?
I think time will tell. I think that's what the campaign is all about, and obviously I'm a Republican, and I believe in limited government, and I believe in trying to enhance private sector economic growth. You can't have a healthy economy when everyone works for the public sector or the nonprofit sector. Those are all important and those are significant, but what creates the wealth and opportunity in our society is a healthy, thriving private sector economy. So I distinguish the presidential race from this race. People are going to make their decision not based on what I say or what some candidate for Congress says about the presidential race. They're intelligent enough to make their decision on the presidential race. But I'm hoping people will look at my record, my views, my values, and the policy programs that I've set forth, like dealing finally with this Medicaid property tax issue, getting tax reform so that we encourage more growth in our economy. If we don't get more economic growth, we are not going to be able to pay for the programs, defense, securing our borders, anti-drug kind of programs. Heroin and prescription drug abuse is a rampant problem in this region and in this district. Within 10 years, every single dollar the taxpayers send to Washington is going to go for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. Not a nickel for anything else. So growth, economic growth, is the key to solving our fiscal problems. We now have $19 trillion in national debt. We will never pay that off. We are basically foisting it on our children and our grandchildren. And one of the reasons why I was inspired to run is my frustration over the fact that Washington doesn't seem to be paying attention to the fact that we are staring at a financial cliff very soon, and we're imposing these costs on our kids and our grandchildren, and it's an outrage. So we've got to get more economic growth. That can be done by smart tax and regulatory changes. Here in New York State needs to make some major reforms in terms of how it does things. Albany is headed in the wrong direction as well, as is Washington. So you got to have economic growth as a condition precedent to anything that we want to do in terms of programs or transportation or defense. You got to have economic growth.
Now let's come back here to New York and talk the environment for 1 second. Let's talk fracking first. Where do you stand on that? Should there be fracking in New York State to improve the economy, or is the environmental
well, it's being
consequences too severe?
It's being done safely in 31 states. The Court of Appeals ruled, this is before Cuomo made his decision, the Court of Appeals in New York State ruled that localities could zone it in or out. The places that want it along the Pennsylvania border, where there's a lot of shale gas potential, they should be able to consider it if that community wants it. The places that don't want it, I understand their objection as well. But it's important to note that the United States is now the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world. This is an American technology. For those that say, well, we don't do anything, we don't invent anything, we don't manufacture anything here at home, well, the natural gas development and energy development, that is this revolution that's taken place in the last 10 years in our country, is wholly American made. We're exporting this technology to other states, other countries. So, it's a lot better to have $2.20 a gallon gasoline than $4.50 a gallon gasoline. I think most people would agree with that. Part of the reason why we've got lower prices for energy and natural gas and gasoline is because of the energy revolution that has come about in the last 10 years in the U.S. And if you had said to someone 10 or 15 years ago, oh, we would be the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world, they'd say you were crazy. But indeed, that's what has happened.
So the short answer is pro-fracking.
The short answer is I'm for responsible, safe production of energy here in the United States. But we need an all-of-the-above strategy. We need renewables, we need solar and wind, we need nuclear, and we need oil and natural gas.
There really is not a more critical environmental issue right now than one that's in our backyard.
Hoosick Falls.
Hoosick Falls and
Yeah,
Petersburg.
and Petersburg.
The PFOA crisis. Do you think the state of New York has done enough to protect the people of Hoosick Falls, past and present?
I think that government, the federal and state governments, dropped the ball. And I think that now they're responding, but I think it's pretty clear that there needs to be a close and thorough examination of who knew what when, because clearly the people in Rensselaer County and Hoosick Falls and Petersburg were left in the dark by the state. And I've talked to many people there, and it's really objectionable and outrageous that this was done. The key is, what do you do going forward? And I noticed that the House and Senate in Washington have actually enacted new legislation to deal with these so-called orphan chemicals that have not previously been studied and tested. And PFOA was one of these. And I think we need a more nimble response from government when, with all of these chemical compounds that are being used in industry and production, but PFOA has been used for nonstick coatings on cookware and for insulation capacities with wiring. It's been used for many decades. So you do wonder, the question I have is, why did it take so long before federal and state regulators started to look at this in terms of what were safe levels? And was there a human impact to exposure from this chemical? So I think government really dropped the ball. It's an example of where we need to do better. And I think the people of Hoosick Falls and Petersburg have a lot to grouse about.
And you want to see hearings?
I think that would be appropriate. I mean, I think it would be an appropriate response both at the federal and state level.
And as we go forward, you think enough is being done now that the situation has been addressed, or is there still more? Could it be a more thorough, a more exhaustive effort to help those people?
Well, they've put in filtration systems. I think that has greatly reduced, from what I've read, greatly reduced the levels in the groundwater and in their public water supply. And I think hearings would help, you know, not to just make it an incendiary thing, but hearings would help to really understand what went wrong in the regulatory process and how it can be improved in the future. I don't think there's anything wrong with more information for people.
And more publicity, more shining the light?
Well, absolutely. But I think from a regulatory standpoint going forward, we've got to be vigilant for what other chemicals are in the same category, having not been fully analyzed and tested, that may have a potential harm in the environment. So I think that's something that's going to be an ongoing process.
Okay. I want to ask you about all these commercials, because that's how people are viewing you in many ways, you and your opponent. Obviously, you're going door to door, you're going to events, but we know that people watch television and they see these commercials. Right. And the tone from both sides has been negative, that's for sure. I mean, do you endorse that negativity?
Well, in actuality, my opponent started attacking me months ago. And the fact is, he's made a lot of false charges. So it's important for me to respond and to point out to people that what he's said is either a gross distortion or completely untrue. The fact is that politics, and I know people don't like the negativity. I certainly don't like the negativity. And so that's why I've tried to run a positive campaign talking about how I want to fix the property tax issue with Medicaid, how we need to get more private sector economic growth, why we need tax reform to promote that private sector economic growth, and regulatory reform. Those are the issues that I think really, when I go to doors and when I speak at events, that's what I talk about. But it's also true that my opponent is a guy who's only recently in the district. I've been here 33 years working. My wife and I have raised our family here. My wife's a school nurse at our local high school. We're deeply imbued in this community. I just didn't drop in here from New York City with a bunch of money and attempt to buy a congressional seat. I've been living and working here for a long time. So the fact that he has falsely attacked me, I have to respond to that, because otherwise people will believe it.
Back at the start of your career, though, you did move here and run for office.
Well, you know, I lived here when I moved here, I was immediately involved in the community, involved in a whole lot of things. And after a few years being here, I did run for office. There's nothing the matter with that. But when I never falsely, his path to electoral success is to falsely smear me. And that's why Fred Dicker, when he was on, you know, probably there's no person that knows the Capitol better than Fred Dicker. He looked at these charges, he said it was a smear. And Chris Churchill, the columnist for the Times-Union, said, my opponent's campaign is filled with hypocrisy and dishonesty. So it's not just me pointing this out, it's other third-party sources who have pointed out that there's virtually nothing this guy has said. Well, he did pronounce my name correctly, but nothing else that he said is true.
Which is not always easy, actually, with your name.
Do, re, mi, fa, so.
There you go. The lobbying charges, answer those for me. You know, your opponent is claiming that your lobbying firm was sanctioned and faced a ban and blaming you for it.
Yeah, it's again, more nonsense. I was an employee of a 400-member law firm. I was not part of any settlement that my former employer made with the then Attorney General Cuomo. I never paid a fine. I was never banned. I've never been banned, sanctioned, fined, admonished. I've never even been accused, Greg. And yet this guy comes on, runs TV ads saying I've been banned, that I've been sanctioned, that I paid fines, that I violated state laws. It's all untrue. You know, when you're a public figure, when you run for office, this is what you have to deal with sometimes. But I think people are seeing through it. And look, the Siena poll came out recently, and it said most people in this district view my opponent as the one who's running the smear campaign, the negative campaign. And they said that I was significantly ahead. Now, it's a primary. So I'm just encouraging Republicans who are eligible to vote in this primary on June 28th to come out and vote, because they're the ones that get to ultimately decide this. And I'll put my record up for 30+ years of living and working in this community, involved in the public sector, in public service, involved in the private sector as an attorney, and also involved in our community. I'll put that up against a fellow who just moved here, has a bucket of money, and he thinks he wants to buy a congressional seat. I think the people will decide, and I'm hopeful they'll decide for me.
And you're not the unnamed lobbyist in Albany in that settlement?
The entire thing was a smear against me that was tried by the most vindictive man in Albany, Andrew Cuomo, and he wasn't successful because I was dropped from the entire thing. I had no role in that settlement. I wasn't part of it, and I've never paid any fine or been banned from doing anything.
Does it bother you when he puts on his commercials that you're a failed politician? I mean, if we only voted for politicians who have won every election, we wouldn't have many politicians. But does that bother you, that tone?
No, it's silly. Again, this guy hires, he moves in, he has a lot of money, he hires a bunch of political assassins, and this is what they do. This is why, one of the reasons why a lot of people won't run for office, but it's also why a lot of average citizens get turned off and they get cynical about it because they watch this nonsense in these 30-second ads, which stations like yours, by the way, make a lot of money on. But the fact of the matter is, I think people see through it, and I can point out independent people like Fred Dicker and Chris Churchill in the Times-Union have both said this guy's tactics amount to a smear and hypocrisy. He's not telling the truth, and I think people see through it.
Okay. Tell me something about you that people out there would be surprised to hear.
Well, that they'd be surprised to hear that
a little personal tidbit.
Well, personal tidbit. Well, I grew up, my dad was a small business person, and then he became the janitor in our Catholic school. And you know, you learn when your dad is the guy mopping the floor and sweeping the floor in the school where you're going, first you feel a little embarrassed. And you think, oh, gee, this is, but you know, after a while, I realized what I learned from my dad and my mother was that all work is good, that if you're out there working hard for your family, that's the most important thing. And so my mother gave me the desire for a love of history and a love of current affairs, and that's how I really gravitated towards politics. First political experience. I went to a Kennedy for President rally in 1960 when I was 8 years old with my mother. I still have the button from it. So I grew up a Kennedy Democrat, if you will. And the fact is that, so maybe that's surprising to some people, but the background I have, the experience that I have, tells me that hard work, and being honest and forthright, and having a deep desire to try to improve our region and our country, that's what motivates me. So you know, they're not with us anymore, but I owe a lot to my mom and dad every day I think about it.
There you go. One more personal question. Outside of your town of Kinderhook, give me your favorite place in the district.
That's really a dangerous proposition for me, but I would say that in every county, each of the 11 counties, I have a favorite place, and a favorite diner, and a favorite coffee shop, and now that we're into the summer months, although the last few days hasn't felt like it, I'm finding favorite ice cream places along the way. So I like to say I'm eating my way around the district. So I'm not going to choose a favorite place because I don't want to offend anyone. They're all favorite to me.
Who's got the best coffee? Tell me that.
Who has the best coffee? Well, I have to tell you, the new Kinderhook Broad Street Bagel store has really excellent coffee. So I enjoy going there. And there's a place in Delhi called the Blueberry, I'm missing the name right now, the Wild Blueberry Cafe. It's on Main Street in Delhi. They've got these enormous cups. You order a cup of coffee and it's this enormous thing. It almost looks like a soup bowl. And the food is really terrific. So there've been a number of great places, but that's one that sticks in my mind.
All right. We'll wrap it up by going back to politics. What's the primary difference between you and your opponent? Why are people voting for you?
Because I've lived and worked in the district for 33 years. I think my views and values reflect the people of the district, and I know the district. How can you be a representative unless you really understand the concerns that people have and have lived here and know the district? So I think that's the knowledge that I would take with me to Washington, and I think that's really important. If you want to be a representative, you've got to know the people.
Okay. I want to give you the chance to look into the camera and say one thing to the viewers. You know, what do you say to them as to why you should be elected to this seat?
Well, I have the experience and the values that reflect this district, and I'm hopeful that people in the Republican primary on June 28th will come out and support me. If you want to learn more, go to johnfaso.com, and hopefully I'll make it past the primary and be there in the general election.
Right on the problem?